There's a sentence you probably said today without even noticing you said it. Maybe in the shower, maybe halfway through your coffee, something small. Of course this happened. Typical. Nothing ever works out for me. It didn't feel important. It felt like commentary, the kind of thing you say and immediately forget. But your nervous system didn't hear commentary. It heard instruction. If you've spent years trying to build a different life, calmer, wealthier, more loved, while still handing your mouth, your attention, and your interpretation of every problem over to the old one, this video is going to explain exactly why that pattern keeps winning. Not with more positive thinking. With 3 quiet habits almost everyone repeats every single day, habits that feel harmless, even reasonable, and that may be the very thing keeping your old reality fully funded. Let's start right where the last block left off, because the sentence you don't notice yourself saying is the same sentence half the internet is currently telling you to ignore, just with better lighting and a calmer voice. You've probably seen the video. Someone sitting in a sunlit kitchen, holding a cup of tea, telling you that the life you want already exists. That the money, the relationship, the healed body, the dream job, all of it is already real, in some parallel version of you, just waiting to cross over. All you have to do is relax. Stop trying so hard. Let it come. And here's the strange part. That idea isn't wrong. It's just been handed to you with the instructions torn off. Because if you actually believed your dream apartment already existed somewhere, fully furnished, paid in full, you wouldn't expect it to show up because you stopped worrying for an afternoon. You'd expect a process. You'd expect to be the one who has to walk over and pick up the key. Somewhere along the way, that part got deleted. What's left is a version of the idea so stripped down it sounds almost like a joke. Sit on your couch, picture the number in your bank account, and any minute now, a delivery driver is going to knock on your door holding a check for $1 million because the universe heard you wanting it. Nobody actually believes that. And yet, a lot of people are living as if it should work that way. Disappointed, quietly, every single day it doesn't. So let's name the actual problem, because it isn't manifestation, it isn't belief, it isn't the idea that your desired reality already exists in some form. The problem is, what happens to a true principle once it gets passed through enough second-hand voices that all the responsibility gets sanded off of it? Here's a cleaner way to hold it. Picture an online order. The product you want is already sitting in a warehouse, fully in stock, ready to ship. That part is true. It exists right now, somewhere. But shipping still needs an address. And if the address on file is still your old apartment, the one with the cracked window and the landlord who never fixes anything, that's exactly where the package keeps getting sent. Not because the warehouse ran out, not because you didn't want it enough, because the address never got updated. Most people spend years trying to want harder, picture more vividly, feel more grateful when the actual leak is somewhere else entirely. They're still giving their old address to the universe every single day through what they say, what they keep paying attention to, and how they interpret what's going wrong. The desire is fully formed. The delivery instructions are still pointing at the past. You can see this play out in small, almost invisible ways. Someone wants more financial ease, and in the same week says, "I'll probably never catch a break 3 separate times to 3 separate people," without registering it as anything more than a tired joke. Someone wants a calmer body and spends their commute rehearsing every way tomorrow could go wrong. Someone wants a different relationship and describes the current one in detail to anyone who'll listen as proof that people always let them down. None of this feels like sabotage. It feels like being honest. It feels like venting, observing, just talking, but it's still an address being written down over and over in the only handwriting your life actually reads. So here's the real question underneath all of this. The one most manifestation content skips entirely because the answer requires more than relaxing. If everything you wanted is already available in some form right now, why hasn't it shown up in your actual Tuesday afternoon bills and traffic experience yet? The answer isn't mystical. It isn't about your worthiness, your karma, or whether you meditated long enough this morning. It comes down to 3 ordinary things almost everyone does, every single day, often while genuinely trying to manifest something better. 3 habits so normal they don't even register as habits. They show up in how you talk about money. They show up in how you talk about your body, your relationships, your work. And by the time we're done naming them, you're going to start hearing them in your own sentences. Not as a punishment, but as the first real, usable information you've had in a long time about why the package keeps getting returned to sender. Before I tell you what those 3 habits actually are, I want to be honest about something, because the honesty matters more than the information. This isn't going to sound like a stage. I'm not going to talk to you like someone who's watched your choices from a distance and is now ready to grade them. Think of this more like the conversation you'd have with an older brother who already wrecked the car a few times himself. The one who isn't impressed by theory anymore because he's tried most of it, and who'd rather tell you the unglamorous version of what actually changed something than keep handing you another inspiring sentence to underline. Not because he's been watching you, because he's been watching himself for longer than he'd like to admit and recognized the pattern from the inside. Here's the part I don't usually say out loud because it doesn't make for a great highlight reel. For years, my first attempt at changing my life had nothing to do with belief at all. It was strategy, more effort, more control. I built schedules that would make a productivity consultant nervous. I optimized mornings, tracked habits, color-coded goals. Read the books about discipline and willpower, took on more work because more work felt like proof that something was finally moving. If the life I wanted wasn't arriving, the obvious answer seemed to be that I simply hadn't pushed hard enough yet. So I pushed harder. For longer than I want to admit, that was the entire plan. Grip tighter, work more, control every variable I could reach, and assume the results would eventually catch up to the effort. They didn't, not in any way that matched the size of the effort. The bank account moved a little, the body got a little more disciplined, but the underlying shape of the life, the worry that lived in the background, the relationships that kept following the same script, the quiet feeling that I was always one emergency away from everything tipping over, that shape barely shifted at all. I had changed my behavior. I hadn't changed what was actually running things, so I went looking somewhere else. That's when the second phase started, the one a lot of people watching this will recognize immediately. Personal development. Self-help books stacked by the bed, seminars in hotel ballrooms with motivational music playing before anyone even walked on stage, vision boards, affirmations recited into a bathroom mirror with varying levels of conviction depending on the day, law of attraction content, manifestation journals, gratitude lists, the whole architecture of trying to think and feel my way into a different life instead of muscling my way into one. And to be fair, something did shift. I felt calmer some mornings. I noticed more good things. There were moments that genuinely felt like proof the practices were working. But underneath all of it, if I was honest with myself in the quiet moments, the actual results, the money, the relationships, the sense of ease in my own body, were still living in roughly the same neighborhood they'd always lived in, different furniture, same address. That gap is the part nobody talks about enough. Not the gap between trying and not trying, because I was trying, in both phases, with real effort and real sincerity. The gap between doing the practices and actually becoming a different kind of person on the inside, in a way that the practices were supposed to produce, but somehow weren't quite reaching. I could say the affirmation, I could picture the dream house, I could write the gratitude list, and then I'd close the journal, go check my bank balance with the same tight feeling in my chest, and answer a text from someone in the same defensive tone I always used with them, completely unaware that I'd just spent 15 minutes undoing the 15 minutes before it. If any of that sounds familiar, if you've done the strategy phase, the self-help phase, maybe both at once, and you're still living a life that resembles the one you were trying to leave a little too closely, I'm not telling you this story so you'll feel behind. I'm telling you because the gap I just described isn't a personal failure, it's a structural one. There's a reason effort alone doesn't finish the job, and there's a reason positive thinking alone doesn't finish it either. Both of them are missing the same hidden mechanism, the one almost nobody names directly, the one that decides, quietly and constantly, which version of your life keeps getting funded. That mechanism starts with something so ordinary you've probably never once considered it a tool. It starts with where your attention actually goes when nobody's watching, and what that attention has been feeding every single day, long before you ever picked up a journal or a vision board. Here's where the mechanism finally gets a name, and it's a smaller, plainer word than you'd expect for something this important. Attention. Not attention in the vague, spiritual sense of raise your awareness. Attention in the literal sense, where your mind actually goes by default, especially in the moments when nobody's asking you to perform anything. Wherever that attention keeps landing isn't neutral, it's an investment, and whatever gets invested in, consistently over time, tends to get resourced, expanded, and confirmed, simply because you keep handing it your focus, your energy, your follow-up thoughts. Picture the metal detector at airport security. It's built to notice one specific thing. Walk through with a belt buckle, a phone, a set of keys, and it doesn't care. It stays silent. But the moment something matches the one frequency it's tuned to, it goes off immediately, loudly, every single time, regardless of what else is in your bag. It isn't lying, it isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it was calibrated to do. Scan for one thing and ignore almost everything else. Most people's attention works the same way, except nobody installed the calibration on purpose. It got set, slowly, by years of repeated emotional experience. Every disappointment that got replayed, every fear that got rehearsed, every "of course this happened" that got muttered under your breath. And once that calibration is in place, your attention doesn't go looking for evidence the hard way. It just beeps. The bounced payment beeps. The unanswered text beeps. The ache in your lower back beeps. Meanwhile, the small, ordinary evidence of things actually going right, the bill that got paid without drama, the conversation that didn't turn into a fight, the morning that passed without incident, walks straight through the detector without a sound because nothing was tuned to notice it. This is also the piece that the warehouse and the shipping address from earlier were quietly pointing toward. If the package, the thing you actually want, is sitting there, fully real, fully available, the only reason it keeps landing back at your old address is that your attention keeps confirming the old address as the correct one. Every time you scan for what's wrong and find it, you're not just noticing a fact, you're re-entering the same coordinates. There's a thinker named Neville Goddard who spent a good part of his work circling this exact idea, long before anyone called it manifestation. His core claim, stripped of the more mystical language he often used, comes down to something fairly direct. The version of you who already has the life you want isn't waiting somewhere in the future. In some form, that version is available right now, and the work isn't to wish your way toward becoming them. It's to start occupying their posture before the evidence arrives. Not pretending, occupying. There's a real difference between closing your eyes and imagining a number in your bank account and actually carrying yourself hour to hour the way someone carries themselves who has never once doubted that money finds its way to them. You can see the difference most clearly in how two different people respond to the exact same problem. An unexpected expense shows up, a car repair, a medical bill, whatever it is. One person feels the old familiar drop in the stomach, says some version of, "See, this always happens," and spends the next hour scanning every other unpaid thing on the list. Another person, who has genuinely started occupying that more secure inner posture, still feels the sting of the expense because they're human, not a robot. But the sentence that follows isn't "this always happens." It's closer to, "All right, let's figure out where this comes from." Same bill, same bank balance, completely different address being entered. That gap between the person who reacts from the old evidence and the person who responds from the assumed state sounds simple when you say it out loud. Almost too simple. But living inside that gap, hour after hour, day after day, turns out to be one of the hardest things a person can attempt, mostly because of something nobody warns you about until you've already tried it. For a while, you end up standing with one foot in the life you're leaving and one foot in the life you're trying to occupy, and neither one feels fully real yet. That in-between place is exactly where most people quietly give up, and it's exactly where we're going next. Nobody warns you about the part that comes after you start trying to change. They tell you about the breakthrough, the shift, the moment everything clicks. They almost never mention the stretch in between, where you're not quite living in the old life anymore, but you're definitely not living in the new one yet either. If you've felt that, you're not imagining it, and you're not doing it wrong. Picture a house mid-renovation. The kitchen has new countertops, fresh paint, a window that finally opens properly. Walk down the hall, though, and you're back in the old carpet, the old light fixtures, dust sheets still draped over half the furniture. You can't honestly call it the old house anymore. You also can't call it finished. You're just living inside the construction, room by room, and some days that feels less like progress and more like limbo. That's the in-between most people quietly give up in, not because they failed at manifesting anything, but because nobody told them the transition itself would feel unfinished, drafty, half-built. They expected a clean cut between two lives. What they got instead was scaffolding. Here's the part that actually matters, though. While you're standing in that half-renovated house, what you keep saying out loud about it determines almost everything that happens next. This is the first of the 3 habits, and it's so ordinary that most people never once flag it as significant. It's simply the way you talk. Not your deepest beliefs, not some buried childhood wound, just the sentences that come out of your mouth on an average Tuesday about money, about your body, about the people in your life. Here's a way to actually hold this instead of just nodding along to it. Imagine your own subconscious as a very literal accountant, the kind with no sense of humor, no concept of sarcasm, and no patience for nuance. Every sentence you say out loud gets handed to this accountant as a ledger entry, not as a feeling, not as a passing mood, as a confirmed fact ready to be filed and built into next month's budget. Say, "I'm always broke," while laughing about it with a friend, and the accountant doesn't hear humor. They hear an instruction to keep the books consistent with that line. Say, "Nothing good ever happens to me after a bad morning," and that entry goes in the ledger right alongside whatever else has been recorded there for years. You can watch this happen in real time if you start listening for it. Someone gets a flicker of good news, a promising callback, an unexpected compliment, a sign that something might actually be turning, and within seconds, almost reflexively, they undercut it out loud. We'll see if it actually happens. Knowing my luck, it'll fall through. That sentence isn't neutral self-protection. It's a fresh entry, written in the same handwriting as every disappointment that came before it, filed by an accountant who doesn't know the difference between caution and prophecy. This isn't a call to walk around censoring every word in case the universe is listening like some cosmic stenographer. That version of the idea is exactly the shallow interpretation we talked about earlier. And it tends to make people anxious about their own sentences instead of honest with themselves. The actual point is quieter than that. Your thoughts move too fast to track in real time. Your emotions shift before you can name them half the time, but your words, the ones you actually say out loud to other people in your own voice, those you can hear, they're the one part of this entire internal process that surfaces where you can finally catch it, examine it, and choose something different, which is exactly why speech ends up being the first habit worth looking at honestly. Not because it's the most powerful piece of the chain, because it's the most visible one. It's the part of you that's already standing in the light, while your thoughts and emotions are still operating somewhere underground. And once you start listening for it, you'll notice something uncomfortable. Speech rarely shows up alone. It almost always arrives with a partner, one that turns a single offhand sentence into something far more solid, something other people start agreeing with you about. Here's what that partner usually looks like in practice. You don't just think something is wrong, and you don't just say something is wrong. You say it to someone else, and they say something back that confirms it. And now 2 people are standing inside the same story instead of one. But before we get to that, it helps to understand why a single offhand sentence carries so much weight in the first place. Because speech isn't operating alone in your inner system. It's the last visible link in a much longer chain. The chain works roughly like this. A thought arrives, usually quiet, usually fast. That thought generates a feeling, sometimes so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. A tightening, a flicker of dread, a small drop in the chest. That feeling, in turn, shapes an action. And the action is what actually produces a result you can measure in your life. Thought, feeling, action, result. It's not a metaphor. It's closer to plumbing. Each section feeds directly into the next one, whether you're watching it happen or not. The problem with trying to manage this chain at the source is that thoughts and feelings move faster than most people can consciously track. By the time you notice you're anxious, you've usually already had a dozen unnoticed thoughts that built toward it. This is exactly where speech earns its importance, not because it's the most powerful link, but because it's the only one you can actually catch in real time, out loud, where you can hear it. Speech is the bridge, the precise point where whatever's happening inside you crosses over and becomes something the outside world can react to. It's the first link in the chain that leaves your body and enters the room. And once something enters the room, it doesn't usually stay private for long. Which brings us to the second habit, the one that takes a passing thought and turns it into shared, agreed-upon fact. Complaining isn't simply describing a problem. There's an important difference between naming something honestly. This bill is higher than I expected, and I need to figure out what to do about it. And complaining about it, which usually means bringing other people into the problem as witnesses, repeating the story to anyone who'll listen, posting about it, looking for someone to validate how unfair or exhausting or typical the whole situation is. The first version stays a fact you're handling. The second version becomes a story you're maintaining, with a growing cast of supporting characters. Think about wet cement. Right after it's poured, it's still soft enough to be reshaped, smoothed over, redirected. That's most problems. In their natural state, temporary, still settling, not yet locked into a final shape. But every time you describe that problem to someone new, and they nod along, agree that it's unfair, add their own version of a similar story, it's like another scoop of cement getting poured into the same mold. Nobody intends any harm by it. The friend who says, "That's so typical, things like that always happen to good people," genuinely believes they're being supportive. But each one of those moments adds material to something that hadn't fully hardened yet. And the more scoops that get added, the more solid, permanent, and unmovable the whole structure starts to feel, not because the situation actually changed, but because it's been poured into, again and again, by everyone who heard the story. This is why 2 people can experience an almost identical setback, a job falling through, an argument with a partner, a diagnosis that needs more tests, and end up living completely different distances away from it 6 months later, not because one person suffered less, because one of them kept adding cement to the story every time it came up. while the other one, even while genuinely upset, kept the wet cement wet. Talked about it less, recruited fewer witnesses, left more room for the shape of the situation to keep changing instead of locking it into something permanent through sheer repetition. There's something almost merciful built into the nature of problems themselves, something most people never get the chance to notice because they're too busy pouring more material into the mold to see it. Most problems were never built to last. They were built to pass. Most problems carry their own built-in expiration date, a financial shortfall, a misunderstanding with someone you love, a stretch of bad health. Left alone, without anyone adding to the story, these things tend to move. They shift, settle, resolve, or simply fade into the background the way most weather eventually does. The cement, left untouched, would have hardened into something far smaller than it ends up becoming. What stretches the expiration date isn't the problem itself, it's the retelling. Every additional conversation about it, every fresh audience brought in to hear the details again, every new scoop of agreement poured into the mold, that's what keeps a temporary situation occupying permanent real estate in your life. The instruction underneath this habit isn't never talk about hard things. It's closer to stop handing your hard things over to be reinforced by everyone you meet and start letting them move through you the way they were actually built to. If you've made it this far with me, I want to ask you for something small. Hit subscribe and follow along here because we go deeper into exactly this kind of pattern every single day. The quiet mechanics that decide which version of your life keeps getting funded. And if you've already caught yourself, even once, mid-sentence, pouring a fresh scoop onto an old problem while reading this, drop a word for that in the comments. Just naming it counts for something. Now, back to the part that actually changes how all of this feels from the inside. Because there's a third habit hiding underneath the first two, and it's the one that decides whether a setback feels like a dead end or like a doorway. Here it is plainly. Most people treat their problems as proof. Proof that they're behind, proof that the universe is against them, proof that the good life everyone else seems to be living was never quite meant for them. But a problem isn't proof of anything except contrast. The simple, almost mechanical fact that you've now experienced something you don't want, which means you now know, with far more precision than before, what you actually do want instead. Think about a rose bush that's been left unpruned for a season too long. From a distance, the thorns look like the whole point, sharp, defensive, unwelcoming. But anyone who's actually grown roses knows the thorns were never the obstacle. They grow exactly where the plant is investing its energy into something tender enough to need protecting. And the gardener who understands this doesn't curse the thorns or try to remove every single one. They use the thorns as a map. Right here, something was trying to bloom. Prune carefully at this exact point, and next season's flower often comes in fuller than the one before. A financial strain isn't proof you're bad with money. It's a thorn marking exactly where you want more ease. A friction-filled relationship isn't proof you're unlovable. It's a thorn marking exactly where you want to be met with more patience, more honesty, more peace. The discomfort itself is doing something useful, even while it hurts. It's narrowing the focus of a desire that might have stayed vague forever without that contrast to sharpen it. This doesn't mean manufacturing gratitude for things that genuinely hurt or rushing past real grief to find the silver lining before you've actually felt the loss. That's its own kind of dishonesty, and we're not interested in that version either. It means something quieter. The moment you can look at a problem and ask, "What is this showing me I actually want?" instead of only asking, "Why is this happening to me?" You've shifted from collecting evidence that you're stuck to collecting information about exactly where to prune next. There's a teacher named Abraham Hicks who spent decades circling a version of this same idea, often using the word contrast instead of problem. The basic claim, set aside the more elaborate language it sometimes comes wrapped in, is fairly grounded. You weren't designed to know exactly what you want in advance, all at once, with perfect clarity. You find out what you want by occasionally bumping into what you don't. Life, in this view, isn't a straight line toward a single destination. It's closer to a long, ongoing process of comparison, where each disappointment hands you slightly sharper information than you had the day before. Think of an archer adjusting aim, shot after shot, on a windy afternoon. The first arrow lands too far left. A beginner might take that as proof they're hopeless with a bow. Someone who actually understands the process reads it differently. That miss told them exactly how much to correct on the next draw. The second arrow lands closer, still slightly off. Another correction. By the 10th shot, the adjustments aren't guesswork anymore. They're precise because every previous miss became data instead of evidence of failure. A relationship that left you feeling unheard isn't proof you're destined to be overlooked. It's an arrow that landed left, sharpening exactly how much you now value being heard. A stretch of financial instability isn't proof that ease was never meant for you. It's an arrow that landed short, narrowing your aim towards something steadier. None of this requires you to be grateful for the miss while it's stinging. It only asks you to notice, eventually, that the miss did something useful. It made the next shot more accurate than blind hope ever could have. Which brings us to the part most people get tangled in once they actually try to live this way. If you're supposed to stop feeding the old reality with your words, your complaints, and your interpretation of every setback as a dead end, does that mean you're just supposed to sit still and wait? No. And this is where the idea of ignoring your current reality tends to get misread the most. Ignoring it doesn't mean pretending the bills aren't due, the diagnosis isn't real, or the relationship isn't strained. It means something more specific, redirecting where your energy and your action actually point. Picture a door that's jammed shut. Paint sealed it years ago. The frame's swollen. It simply won't budge. One option is to keep throwing your shoulder against that exact door, again and again, certain that enough force will eventually win. You'll get tired, bruised, and likely no closer to the other side. The other option is to stop fighting that specific door and start checking the rest of the house. There's almost always another door, another hallway, a window that opens easily enough if you're willing to look away from the one that's stuck. Acting from the problem looks like obsessively replaying what went wrong, arguing with people who were never going to agree with you, scrolling through everyone else's apparent success as a form of self-punishment. Acting from the solution looks different, even though it's still action, still effort, still real movement in the world. It looks like reaching out to one new person instead of refining your complaint about the old ones. It looks like improving the thing you're offering instead of dissecting why the last attempt failed. The stuck door might stay stuck for a while longer. That's fine. You're no longer spending your strength on it. And here's the part that tends to surprise people once they actually start living this way. New ideas show up faster. A name crosses your mind for no clear reason, and it turns out to matter. A conversation happens to land at exactly the right moment. None of this needs to be treated as proof of anything mystical. It happens, in large part, because your attention is no longer fully occupied scanning for what's wrong. There's finally some room left over to notice what's actually opening. Here's something worth sitting with for a second. Almost everything you currently call your reality, the number in your account, the tone of your closest relationship, the way your body feels most mornings, is old news. Not in a dismissive way. Literally. It's the printed result of thoughts, words, and focus that were set in motion days, weeks, sometimes years ago. You're not looking at a forecast, you're looking at yesterday's edition, finally delivered to your doorstep. Think about how a newspaper actually works. The events on the front page already happened before a single copy got printed. By the time you're holding it, sipping your coffee, reading about what occurred, the ink has already dried on something that's behind you, not ahead of you. Nobody in their right mind treats this morning's headline as a prediction for next month's weather. And yet that's almost exactly what most people do with their own circumstances. They look at this month's bank statement and quietly conclude, "This is simply who I am with money." They look at a strained relationship and decide, "This is simply how people treat me." They're reading yesterday's edition and mistaking it for tomorrow's forecast. The statement itself isn't lying. It's an accurate report of choices, conversations, and focus from months back. But an accurate report of the past is not the same thing as a verdict on what's still possible. The mistake isn't in noticing the numbers. The mistake is handing them more authority than a printed page deserves, treating old news as if it were breaking news about your future instead of what it actually is. The final draft of a story you've already finished telling. This is where the 3 habits we've walked through stop being 3 separate things and start working as one continuous editorial process, running every single day, whether you're paying attention to it or not. Every time you describe your situation with the same defeated language, you're republishing yesterday's edition. Every time you bring someone else in to confirm how unfair or unfixable something is, you're sending that same edition back to print with another signature added underneath it. And every time you treat a setback as proof you're stuck rather than as a thorn marking where you actually want to grow, you're filing the story under, "This is just how my life goes," instead of under, "Draft, subject to revision." None of this requires you to lie to yourself about what's currently true. The bill is still due. The conversation still needs to happen. The body still needs whatever care it needs. Nobody's asking you to pretend the front page is blank. The invitation is smaller and more honest than that. Stop handing your speaking time, your retelling, and your interpretation over to the story that's already finished printing, and start using that same time, that same breath, that same attention to draft something closer to what you actually want next. You won't get a guarantee that tomorrow's edition arrives exactly the way you wrote it, Nobody gets that, but you do get to decide today what kind of submission you're sending in. Whether you spend the next conversation rehearsing the old headline one more time, or whether you let it stay quiet for once and leave a little more room for something else to be true. That's really the whole shift underneath all three habits. Not bigger effort, not louder belief, just paying closer attention to what you keep putting into print. Somewhere in your week, there's still a half-renovated room, a bill that hasn't cleared, a conversation that didn't go the way you wanted. None of that has to be resolved tonight for something real to shift. The shift was never about clearing every unfinished room at once. It was always about what you start saying inside the one you're standing in right now. You've heard over the last few minutes what's actually been running underneath all of it. The warehouse never ran out of what you wanted. The address just kept getting confirmed by what you said out loud, again and again, without noticing. The detector that keeps finding everything wrong wasn't broken. It was simply calibrated by years of practice, and it can be recalibrated the same way it was built, one repetition at a time. The cement only hardens because it keeps getting poured into. The thorn was never the obstacle, it was the map. And every circumstance you're currently living inside is only this morning's edition, not tomorrow's forecast, no matter how convincing the headline reads. So here's the only practice worth carrying out of this video, and it's small enough to actually do tonight. Before you fall asleep, find one sentence you said today about your life. Just one. Notice whether that sentence was finishing yesterday's edition or quietly starting tomorrow's. That's the entire discipline. Not bigger belief, not louder positivity. Just paying attention to what you're putting into print, one ordinary sentence at a time, until the new sentence starts to feel less like a performance and more like the truth. If something in this found you tonight at the right moment, stay close. Follow this channel, because we walk through exactly this kind of quiet mechanism every day. Not abstract spirituality, but the actual architecture underneath the life you keep living. And if you know someone standing in their own half-finished room right now, still pouring cement into a story that was supposed to pass months ago, send this to them. Not just one person, pick 5. Some of them are closer to the doorway out than they realize, and sometimes all it takes is someone else handing them the right sentence at the right time. Before you go, leave a comment with the one sentence you caught yourself saying today, the one you're finally ready to stop printing. You don't need to explain it, soften it, or make it sound impressive. Just naming it in your own words in front of people walking through the same thing does more than you'd expect. And tell us where you want to go next. What's still confusing, still heavy, still asking for a clearer explanation? That's usually where the next video starts. For now, the cement is still wet. Tonight, whatever you say about your life is still being poured.